When speaking about Disney and theming, of course the majority of discourse will center around their parks. However, something that often feels under-discussed is Disney hotels, and while not all of them are spectacular, many of them are exceptional themed experiences that go above and beyond what the company is required to do in terms of lodging. Disney could easily offer many generic hotels with perks on property, and the company would probably have decent occupancy. That's actually what we're seeing from the company over the past 7 years, whether it's the bland Pixar Pier Hotel near Disneyland, or the Riviera Resort, Gran Destino Tower, or recent hotel rethemes at Walt Disney World. There is definitely a lack of care from the company in regards to the importance of the themed resort experience, which is highly unfortunate because that's a huge part of why their hotels are in demand. I've been pointing out this issue throughout my videos for years now, but today I wanted to instead highlight the things that I do like about the resorts, because while many of them are really well themed, some of them even rise beyond this, becoming structures that I think should be considered architecturally significant. That notion might sound a bit ridiculous, because many people view Disney resorts as nothing more than a place to stay. But when many of these were built in the Eisner era, they were conceived with the idea that Disney was exceptional in everything it did, and many of these resorts reflect that exceptionalism through their notable architecture and theming. I have always perceived well-designed theme parks as expressions of art, and for most of its history, Disney leadership has recognized and pursued that as well. It's easy to view Disney parks from a surface-level perspective as just a place to be entertained, but doing so is a disservice to the many people who have crafted and executed their creative visions here. In the same way, it's easy to just view Disney hotels as a place to stay, with some perks and location convenience, but when I look at a resort like Wilderness Lodge, I'm seeing something far more artistically significant. It's the architecture, the thematic celebration of the North American wilderness, the beautiful outdoor landscaping and theming that puts this on a whole other level from which you can find elsewhere. Its displays and decoration have depth, drawing from real-world culture. That's not to say that a nice, unthemed hotel somewhere else can't be a great experience, but Disney often offered resorts that transcended lodging and became a form of carefully crafted and sophisticated art, which itself is so important in distinguishing the Disney experience from its competitors. At a time when Disney is building what are essentially Las Vegas hotels with an atmosphere of fake opulence and a lack of meaningful theming, I think it's important to reflect on the role of the placemaking of the older eras of Disney resorts. I find it stunning that people, and especially Disney Vacation Club owners, could look at a tower like the Riviera and not see a major downgrade in quality from what came before. So today, let's take a look at some of Disney's absolute best and artistically significant hotels. Because not only are they immensely interesting, but I think it's important to highlight how far the quality has fallen over the past decade. Just a quick favor, but videos like these take a lot of time to write and produce, so if you'd like to show your support, you can help me out by just leaving a like. Disney's first foray into the hotel business began in 1971 with the opening of Walt Disney World, where alongside the Magic Kingdom, they opened the Polynesian and the Contemporary, which was followed a month later by the Fort Wilderness Campground. From the start, while these resorts were very much products of their time, as you can see elements that scream design trends of the late 1960s, they were actually a lot more overtly themed than I anticipated, and you can see that the Polynesian was much more lush. While I still like the Polynesian today, and it does have theming elements that I enjoy, I'm actually surprised to see how bare it looks when compared to the 1970s architecture and artwork that could be found throughout the main building. When I started researching this video, I was ready to dismiss the Polynesian as a very 1970s hotel with a South Pacific flair, inspired by a dying tiki culture trend, but I'm actually surprised to see that it was a lot more aesthetically interesting than what is even there today. However, the real standout was of course the Contemporary, which was erected as a giant A-frame with prefabricated rooms that slid into place. The design of the building was intended to emphasize the large open atrium, which at the time was incredibly new and novel, as large indoor spaces just didn't really exist on such a scale. While designed with input from California architect Welton Beckett, the Contemporary likely took a lot of inspiration from the massive atrium that defined the Regency Hyatt House in Atlanta. This massive 22-story hotel, which opened in 1967, was designed by architect John Portman Jr., which, while still impressive today, was absolutely stunning for its time. In an era where Disney was always pushing the limits of what was possible with Disneyland attractions and now Magic Kingdom, for example, think about ambitious infrastructure like the Utilidors, it's not really a surprise that the company would embrace such challenging engineering and architecture like with the Contemporary, really just because they could. The monorail traveling through the building was, and still is, an enchanting novelty that felt futuristic for the mid-century, and while much of the resort interior has changed over the decades, its unique structure and scale still impresses. Originally, the hotel took on a North American theme, with its convention rooms named after United States geographic regions, and the atrium designated as the Grand Canyon Concourse, derived from the idea that standing in that space must be similar to standing in the Grand Canyon. If you ever wondered why the Mary Blair art on the center shaft reflected that particular theme, then this is where it originated, and you can also see that the original concourse was designed to reflect malls of the 1970s, blending nature with contemporary comfort. Today, the atrium is a mess, with 90s postmodern aesthetics clashing with the stylized mural, and most recently, Disney updating the rooms and open corridors to be themed to The Incredibles. The Contemporary is a hotel I've always wanted to stay in ever since I was a young kid, but honestly, now that I have the money to do it, the new Incredibles rooms have completely diminished my desire to stay there because it really ruins the experience for me. The brand of the Contemporary has always been an upscale mid-century hotel of architectural significance, and putting the Incredibles in there, especially in these objectively cheap room refurbishments, just feels pandering and insulting, not trusting Disney consumers to like or enjoy an experience without slapping the iconography of an IP onto something. I feel less strongly about Chef Mickey's or his inclusion in the concourse, because Mickey and Friends have always been cultural ambassadors of the Disney brand more broadly, reminding you that only Disney was capable of this kind of ambitious architecture, which contrasts rather harshly with the specific and cynical advertisement of characters in places that they don't really belong thematically. A strong Disney brand could embrace the Contemporary for its impressive architecture and promote it as a classy and nostalgic product of the early 1970s, but instead it's now a superficial vessel of brand synergy, which I find to be extremely disappointing. While many resorts of architectural significance were proposed for early Walt Disney World, the only other development of the pre-Eisner period was the Disney Golf Resort in 1973, which, while charmingly of its time in its design, was nowhere near as interesting as what came next. When Eisner became CEO in 1984, he certainly recognized that Disney could expand significantly, and in addition to new parks and experiences, Walt Disney World could benefit from a significant increase in resort capacity. It took until 1988 for the next two resorts to open, which was the Grand Floridian in June, followed by Caribbean Beach in October. I first want to highlight that Caribbean Beach was and still is really quite interesting, as despite its motel-style buildings, the Caribbean colors and design very much distinguish the resort for its time, and it's hard to overlook how notable the central pool is, themed as a Spanish fort overtaken by pirates. Near the pool is Caribbean Key, a themed island that connects both parts of the resort over the water, and the lobby building is designed to emulate a Caribbean town. While much of the resort is still pretty similar today to when it first premiered, a notable element was the old Port Royal food court, designed to look like an outdoor setting with colorful and eclectic Caribbean buildings that acted as different food counters. However, after a refurb to the resort in 2017, the food court was removed in favor of Centertown Market, a huge downgrade in terms of theming that also extended to the previous resort gift shop as well. Caribbean Beach was the turning point where Disney began removing the overt theming of its resorts, replacing it with minimalism, and while I recall people excusing this as a one-time issue in 2017, it has unfortunately still continued to plague the resort refurbishment process since. Let's take a step back to the Grand Floridian though, which opened as Disney's flagship resort, sporting an elegant Victorian-era style of architecture and joining the Polynesian and the Contemporary in front of the Magic Kingdom. What is architecturally interesting about this resort is not just its distinctive style, but that it takes heavy inspiration from many real and culturally notable resorts throughout the United States. If you look into this more, one of the largest inspirations is always going to be cited as Hotel del Coronado in California, which opened in 1888 as a true Victorian-style seaside resort among a San Diego development boom. The resort was always intended as a luxurious destination, and throughout its history has certainly been visited by many high-profile public figures and celebrities, solidifying it as a beautiful and culturally important destination, even to the point where it was designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1977. While this may have been the primary inspiration behind the Grand Floridian, there were certainly other resorts too, including the Bellevue Hotel, which opened near Clearwater, Florida in 1887, predating Hotel del Coronado by just 1 year. However, while it did open with a spectacular red roof contrasting with the white siding, the roof tiles were soon switched to green sometime in the early 1900s, although that still doesn't mean it wasn't an inspiration for Disney's resort. Unlike Hotel del Coronado, which had its interiors and lobby defined by warmer tones and dark wood that contrasted with the exterior, the Grand Floridian's impressive lobby is much brighter and certainly larger. While the Grand Canyon Concourse of the Contemporary was notable for its scale, the Grand Floridian's lobby is impressive for the same reason, even if it is smaller. And as you exit the monorail from the second floor and enter the building, it opens up to a spectacular reveal with the chandeliers hanging at eye level. Other than its well thought out design, what I like about this resort is its nostalgic attempt to bring you into this mostly fictional depiction of 1880s Florida, filled with art pieces that are either from that period or were commissioned specifically to reinforce the theme. While some may find it a bit stuffy, I do really enjoy the attempt at an elegant hotel focus on late 19th century beach leisure, but as contemporary Disney does, they couldn't let this resort exist without adding some dumb character accents that feel weird and out of theme. For example, in 2012, the main pool added a Mad Hatter themed water play area, which has no thematic tie to the resort. While not an IP inclusion, the main pool also added a rocky cliff with waterfall, which is bizarre, as Florida is not at all a rocky state, and so defies the theme. Later, the lobby added tile with Mrs. Potts and Chip, which while yes, it is located in front of the tea room, still has no thematic tie to a Victorian-style seaside Florida resort. In connection with this, the lobby lounge was previously named Meisner's, as in, it was named after Addison Meisner, a famous Florida architect who was incredibly influential in directing Florida architecture towards Mediterranean and Spanish colonial revival styles in the early 20th century, which still very much do define the architectural landscape of the state today. While most people probably missed this tribute, it was still an interesting thematic detail, but in 2017, the space closed, reopening in 2019 as the Enchanted Rose, a lounge and cocktail bar themed to Beauty and the Beast. Like the Mad Hatter pool area, this space obviously has no thematic tie to the resort, and follows that frustrating trend of trying to advertise some specific Disney iconography, without realizing that the Disney brand in this case was an architecturally significant resort, and not just some surface-level movie tie-in. Not that adults can't or shouldn't enjoy the film, but even if Beauty and the Beast was going to be incorporated into the resort, why was the bar deemed appropriate of all places? Like The Incredibles at the Contemporary or Moana at the Polynesian, the Grand also recently received a character-driven room overhaul as well, in this case theming them to Mary Poppins Returns. Mary Poppins as a character used to actually roam the lobby area in the resort's earliest years, which I think was fine for its time as another icon of the company that was present in a small dose, but while the new rooms are subtle in their inclusion of the franchise, it still just seems like another unnecessary aspect of the IP mandate, especially because it's based on the sequel film that just kind of came and went without much cultural impact. The DVC building, which premiered in 2013, features a fountain with the animated penguins from the original film, but while it preceded less destructive thematic changes to the resorts that came in the later 2010s, it's still a weird choice. Ultimately, while the Grand Floridian's design was inspired by many different Victorian-style resorts, especially Hotel del Coronado, it was still very much a celebration of Florida, themed as a luxurious beach resort, and trying to evoke a nostalgic culture of upscale leisure around the early 1900s. I appreciate that particular philosophy of attempting ambitious and expensive architecture, tied together through a theme that feels more sophisticated and interesting than the contrived opulence of a Beauty and the Beast bar. Not many people recognize 1989 as one of the most important years for Disney, but this was a milestone of massive expansion that really dwarfs a lot of these seemingly big lands and rides that have occurred more recently. The year saw the opening of the Wonders of Life at Epcot, the opening of Pleasure Island at the Walt Disney World Village, and two brand new parks, Disney MGM Studios and Typhoon Lagoon. It seems clear to me that the Grand Floridian and Caribbean Beach were greenlit to accommodate the increased demand that would proceed the following year, but it's also obvious that Eisner saw the financial potential of building out resort capacity even further. The next notable addition is actually not owned by Disney, but opened in 1990 as the Walt Disney World Swan. In the early 80s, when Disney was fighting a hostile takeover, was strapped for cash, and Epcot was going far over budget, they struck a deal with the general contractor overseeing Epcot, Tishman Realty and Construction, who, in partnership with Sheraton, would build and operate a few new hotels just outside of Disney's shopping village. This included an exclusivity clause where Disney would not work with other hotel competitors, although the designated timeframe seems to be unknown publicly. Since the deal was mostly done by the time Eisner entered the picture, he clearly was unhappy with the arrangement, as he reportedly violated the deal when attempting to hand over operation of their Disney-owned resorts to Marriott. This resulted in Tishman suing Disney for a breach of contract, and settling out of court, they agreed to build a new hotel near Epcot, with Disney allowed a strong hand in its creative direction, and the operation would be handled by Starwood, which was actually acquired by Marriott in 2016. The result was the Swan, with its design primarily influenced by architect Michael Graves, who was well known as a member of the Memphis Group in the late 80s and designed many buildings with a postmodern philosophy. You can clearly see that postmodern influence here, and it was followed up later in the year with the opening of the Dolphin, which was even more remarkable in its scale. These resorts were the beginning of what became known as the Epcot Resort area, which were followed by the Disney-owned and operated Yacht Club and Beach Club later in November, and eventually the Boardwalk Resort in 1996. In 1991, Disney opened the Port Orleans Resort, which was themed after the New Orleans French Quarter, and the following year, a connected resort opened to the north known as Dixie Landings, expressing an aesthetic that romanticized the antebellum South, with many of its buildings reflecting plantation-style houses. In 2001, Port Orleans added French Quarter to the name, and Dixie Landings was renamed and reworked to Port Orleans Riverside, obviously as a recognition of the poor optics of such an insensitively themed resort. 1991 also saw the opening of Old Key West launching Disney Vacation Club, which, if you were not aware, is Disney's version of a timeshare program. It's a nice resort, but the Key West theme is actually pretty unremarkable for Disney property, so I would assume that this was chosen with the idea or assumption that Caribbean and Key West aesthetics were inherent to the success of timeshares elsewhere in Florida. Continuing forward, 1994 saw the introduction of Disney's first value resorts with the All-Star Sports and All-Star Music, which were then expanded with the All-Star Movies in 1999. While not architecturally significant, as they are essentially overtly themed blocks of motels, they certainly are fascinating bastions of 90s postmodern design, which I covered in my theme parks in the 90s video if you have any desire to learn more. 1994 was also the opening of Wilderness Lodge, which I would definitely cover in a lot more depth later in the video, and jumping past the boardwalk and into 1997, Coronado Springs opened with a colonial Mexican theme that catered to convention guests, which I think allows it to often be overlooked by more regular visitors. It's a beautiful resort, and has a notable pool area themed as an archaeological dig site centered around a Mayan pyramid. It's often one of the least mentioned resorts, but I think it deserves credit for being thematically interesting, so I just wanted to express that I think it's a bit underrated. Finishing up the Eisner era, Animal Kingdom Lodge opened in 2001, which I will also cover later, Pop Century opened in 2003, which I also covered in the 90s video, and finally, Saratoga Springs premiered in 2004, following in the failure of the Disney Institute, converting the space and building out into an equestrian-themed resort based on the real Saratoga Springs in New York. While not part of the Eisner era, I also want to mention the art of animation, which originally started as a sister resort to Pop Century, but was abandoned after 9/11 drove down tourism in the early aughts, restoring partially erected buildings and becoming a resort centered around celebrating Disney and Pixar animation in 2012. It's a well-themed resort that debuted during the height of the Iger era, when Imagineering was still strong, and if you're interested in more information on its weird history and abandoned buildings, I have a specific video covering that as well. You might be wondering though, if this video is focused on the artistic and architectural significance of Disney resorts, why cover all of these when many of them clearly do not reach the same heights as others? Well, while many of them may not achieve that level of greatness, they still very much embody the Disney difference, as in Caribbean Beach could have just been a scattering of motel rooms, but was instead a well-themed resort that went above and beyond in its placemaking to offer a unique experience you won't really find outside of Disney property. Even the all-star resorts often go underappreciated, providing that over-the-top, larger-than-life theming that stands out from whatever you might find offered by cheap motels elsewhere. The point I want to make from all of this is just how aggressively Disney expanded under Eisner throughout the 90s up through 2005, offering a selection of different, thematically interesting resorts that all accommodated different budgets of visitors to Walt Disney World. While the Golf Resort, the Contemporary, and the Polynesian were all great for what they were attempting to be, Eisner drove the resorts in a different, and in my opinion, better direction that emphasized theming in all aspects of the resort experience, which again is slipping quickly under Disney leadership today. However, I really want to emphasize the absolute best of Disney architecture and hotel theming, so let's now take a closer look at the Epcot resorts. Sitting alongside the Swan and Dolphin is the Yacht Club, which along with the Beach Club, were designed by architect Robert Stern. Stern is an interesting figure for Disney, not only because he helped bring to life the elegant New England decadence of these resorts, but because he also worked with Eisner to help Disney acquire the New Amsterdam Theater on Broadway in New York City, and served as a Disney board member from 1992 up through 2003. Can you imagine the current Disney company having an architect on its board? I think that's a telling discrepancy in where the priorities of the company lie. To the casual observer, the Yacht and Beach Club are not too different from one another, but there are definitely differences in architectural design beyond just the color schemes. The backside of the Yacht Club is also notable for having a dock with a lighthouse working as a landmark, which does serve both resorts and providing boat transportation to Epcot. The major pool area is split between the two resorts as well, and is notable for both a sand-bottom pool as well as a shipwreck water slide, with the fallen mast allowing you to slide over the pathway and into one of the pools. Disney didn't need to do any of this to create a popular pool area, but that's the Disney difference that still impresses even today. In terms of theme, the Yacht Club has been described many ways by Disney, but I think is best summarized as a sophisticated New England nautical motif. When walking into the lobby, one of the first decorative items you're going to notice is the globe, which is modeled after one that you would find from the late 19th century. The lobby also contains model sailing ships, which can either be found out in the seating area or behind the check-in counters and bell services, which is a nice thematic touch that I find really interesting. Other decorative elements include framed examples of different sailing knots, as well as nautical paintings, framed maps, and other miscellaneous items. The lobby bar, which is known as the Ale and Compass Lounge, which is attached to the Ale and Compass restaurant, is itself a very cozy space that blends well with the nautical theme. Exploring the halls of the resort, you'll notice that the carpet is designed to emulate the style of sailing maps or globes that you would find on ships, and you'll encounter plenty of decorative elements that you might find in a late 19th century seaside New England town centered around sailing. Even looking into some display cases, you'll spot written novels that reinforce the theme through their nautical focus. Overall, I really enjoy what the Yacht Club has to offer in a thematic sense, and walking over to the Beach Club, it too has a distinct New England theme, although this one feels a lot less formal. At its entrance, you'll be greeted by a beach car, which is a fun decorative element, and walking inside, the lobby is much brighter, a result of its color choice. You'll spot interesting decorative elements like a seahorse chandelier, mounted lighting that incorporates elements of shells, coral, and sea stars, and in general, many other decorative elements that evoke an atmosphere of beach leisure in the early 20th century. While I still prefer the Yacht Club because I think its sailing theme is more interesting, and it feels like there's a lot more cultural depth behind the decoration, Beach Club is still fantastic in its own way, and I can see why people might prefer its brighter, less formal atmosphere. I never really made the connection before writing this video, but it seems that these two resorts are connected thematically with the Grand Floridian in terms of trying to evoke the pleasure of a nostalgic seaside vacation, with the only difference being the regions in which they are set. Finishing off the Epcot resorts though, the boardwalk was intended for a 1991 opening across the water from the Yacht and Beach Club, but actually did not open until 1996. To contrast with New England, the boardwalk is instead architecturally inspired by Atlantic City and many other old American seaside boardwalks, especially the early amusement parks of Coney Island. While it appears that Robert Stern had less influence on the design of this resort, it was still primarily handled by his firm, which again delivered something spectacular. A notable element that I think often gets overlooked is how the porte cochere and lobby are entered on the second level, as a subtle hill perfectly frames and elevates the center of the resort against the room buildings. Entering the lobby itself, you're first greeted with the Hippocampus Electrolier, a reportedly real electric chandelier crafted in the 1920s for Coney Island by MC Illians, which is covered in real gold leaf. Illians was a craftsman that constructed actual carousels, and just beneath the Electrolier is a real miniature that he created, which traveled with him as a showcase of his rides when trying to sell his work. The lobby also contains many other elements of boardwalk amusements, including a model of a rocking swan gondola that can be found on early carousels. Another old carousel element are these nanny chairs, which were often elaborately crafted seats for parents to take a rest on, and these particular chairs in the lobby were recreated by being cast from the 1880 originals. Between these chairs is a fireplace, and looking up, you'll see a model of the Colossus, an elephant-shaped building that stood at a height of 122 feet, and premiered at Coney Island in 1885, where visitors would be able to walk up into and explore the anatomy of the elephant. Sadly, it burned down in 1896, but it was designed by Joseph Mason Kirby, and this was actually his second elephant building, as his first had premiered just south of Atlantic City in 1881. The final lobby element I want to speak about is the model of the Flip Flap Railway, an early roller coaster that opened in 1895 at Sea Lion Park in Coney Island. It was notable for being one of the first coasters with a vertical loop, and was considered extremely dangerous, exposing riders to 12 Gs of force and resulting in many reported injuries, especially with the neck. Still, there is something fun about romanticizing the Victorian boardwalk, and it certainly makes for an ironic theme for a deluxe resort, as boardwalks were often considered disreputable places. The theming of the boardwalk resort extends outside of the lobby as well, and is filled with wonderful paintings, old photos, and old coin-operated novelties like mutoscopes, or what is labeled as a muscle massage machine. If you step out to the waterfront, the resort really is set up like a boardwalk with shops and restaurants, and towards the end, you have the Atlantic Dance Hall and Jelly Roll's Dueling Piano Bar. The pool area is notably themed to seaside amusements as well, as the snack bar has a carousel design, and the slide emulates an old wooden roller coaster. Overall, the boardwalk is really interesting on a cultural level, which I really appreciate, but as always, contemporary Disney just can't help themselves and made some awful decisions here. Obviously, one of the interesting theming elements of this resort is its recreation of old amusement park iconography, some of which comes off as strange and creepy, which I think is partially part of its appeal. As an example of contemporary Disney making changes where it shouldn't, the old pool slide had a decorative piece where riders exited through the mouth of a clown, which, while strange, was very much a unique and memorable element that was in theme with the resort. However, in early 2021, the pool reopened and the clown element was removed, with the bridge going over the slide now featuring a digital print of Mickey and Minnie, which is just absolutely bizarre and doesn't even try to dress the slide up as an old boardwalk amusement. What made Disney Disney was the details, not just random character implementation, and it's really disappointing to see that the clown decoration was removed, especially as people certainly remembered it as a distinct and unique feature. Other issues that have resulted from the most recent resort refurbishment include decorating the lobby with carousel rounding boards, which is a neat idea, But the issue is that these are all paintings of Disney park castles, which obviously do not relate to old boardwalk amusement parks. In fact, the point of Disneyland was that it was the opposite. The same issue has sprung up with Carousel Coffee, a new small shop off the lobby which replaced a sundry store. It has a seating area with photos that are mostly of the carousel and teacups in the Magic Kingdom. The carousel does have some history, as it was built in 1917 and was initially part of Belle Isle Park in Detroit, but it's clear that Disney really missed the point and theme of the resort here, which again is frustrating because Disney is defined by detail, and when you disregard its importance, it really cheapens the once exceptional Disney experience. Still, while I have many complaints about how Disney is ruining the theming of its resorts, I do want to finish up this segment by acknowledging the excellence of the Yacht Club, the Beach Club, and the largely intact elements of the boardwalk that still contribute to such interesting thematic experiences. These resorts are some of Disney's absolute best, and are interesting in how they draw their themes from real-world history and culture. Like the Grand Floridian and the Contemporary, I also consider these resorts to be architecturally significant in their design, a notable factor that has elevated the Disney experience over many of its competitors. Still, I think that Disney has done even better than the Epcot resorts, so let's now move on to my absolute favorites. Up to this point, the focus of this video has been on resorts located at Walt Disney World, and while I would like to stick to that, I do briefly need to mention the Grand Californian. It opened in 2001 as a deluxe hotel at Disneyland Resort and was designed as a celebration of California history. It's notable for its American craftsman architectural style, which fits well with the Pacific Northwest themed area of Grizzly Peak, which is important as the resort actually has an entrance into California Adventure. The building was designed by Peter Dominick, who previously had a large hand in Wilderness Lodge and later Animal Kingdom Lodge, which opened the same year. I don't really want to cover the Grand Californian here because I don't have a lot of footage to illustrate my points, but I didn't really want to discuss the other resorts without at least giving this one an honorable mention. Stepping back though, Wilderness Lodge opened in 1994, and while it's placed on Bay Lake rather than the Seven Seas Lagoon, it joins the Contemporary, the Polynesian, and the Grand Floridian as one of the Magic Kingdom area resorts. From the front, an elevated hill actually hides the true scale of the building, which along with its distinct green roofing, log cabin style siding, and decorative stone elements, is a massive lodge inspired by the American West and the many lodges that you can find in national parks, especially the Old Faithful Inn in Yellowstone. Walking into the lobby, the grand scale is revealed, and there are so many interesting elements here that bring together the American West, Native Americans, and of course American geography into one cohesive motif. The teepee-style chandeliers are reportedly made from real animal hide, although if that's true, I couldn't find specific information on what animal they came from. Still, the contrast between the lit hide and the metal ornamentation depicting natives hunting bison on horseback is such a unique feature for a hotel. The four supporting columns in the middle, made of logs bound together, feature carvings of many animals of the North American wilderness. It's a great thematic feature that is fun to observe, but also feels like a grand and almost epic detail that helps elevate this resort above others. Looking down, you can see that the center of the lobby floor is defined by what is known as the storm pattern, which was inspired by a Hopi tribe weaving and executed through 4 different types of wood. Exploring the lobby, Native American art can be found pretty much everywhere, and extends even into the hallways where the rooms are located. On the sides of the lobby, carved and painted totem poles stretch up to the 6th floor, and turning to the fireplace, the fire screen depicts what I believe is a form of native fire dance. Looking up, the stone of the chimney was designed in such a way as to represent the millions of years that created the different layers of rocks that you would find in the Grand Canyon, and nearby, there is a display case with information that explains the different layers. The fireplace also reportedly has real fossils incorporated into its chimney, which also has a corresponding informational display case on the 5th floor. Nearby at ground level, a handcar that delivers wood sits behind the fireplace, which is a nice detail. In front of Wilderness Lodge Mercantile, a totem pole featuring a few Disney characters stands in front of the doors, which really, I think is fine, as again, Mickey and friends act more as ambassadors of the Disney brand, but I would feel negatively about more specific IP intrusion, such as trying to incorporate Pocahontas, or Home on the Range, or Brother Bear into the rooms or whatever. There's a time and a place for Disney IP, and I think that the occasional Mickey is fine as just a fun nod, specifically because he can be molded to fit any theme. I should also mention that I like the decorative elements of this store, which continues to embrace culture of historic Native American life, and moving across the lobby and into a hallway down to the restaurants, I want to specifically highlight Territory Lounge, which might be one of the coolest places that Disney has ever built. It's a bit unusual in that in addition to celebrating the American wilderness, it contains wall-mounted displays that reveal a bit of history about hunting, trapping, scenic photography, and exploration of the American territories, and even looking up to the ceiling, there's a massive stylized map that chronicles the journey of Lewis and Clark. I've only been served here once, but it also has a great menu and interesting drink selection, which is heavily bourbon-based and has very different cocktails from what you'll find at other Disney bars and lounges. One last highlight of the lobby is an artificial spring, which pumps out water that flows under a bridge and travels outside, becoming what is known as Copper Creek. Following it, you'll step outside into a well-landscaped pathway, flanked by the two massive wings of the hotel, and following the creek, you walk over a bridge and out to Lookout Point. From here, the water cascades down into a waterfall and disappears under another bridge, appearing to feed the water for the pool. It obviously does not actually do this, but it's still a fantastic illusion that you would only find as an element of a Disney resort. Looking back at the building from the general pool area, this really is one of the absolute best sights that you'll see on Disney property anywhere, even around the world. Working your way down to the other side of the pool, you'll see another illusion where water appears to be flowing out of the area and down to the lake, which sits alongside this interesting building known as Humphrey's Hideout, which is essentially just an activity center. Down in this area is also an artificial landscape that means to emulate the geysers of Yellowstone, and in fact, it does have an actual geyser that erupts on the hour, which again is such a unique symptom of the Disney difference, and we just really do not ever see cool things like this any longer. Walking around the resort, many pathways will have animal tracks imprinted into the concrete, which is a fun little theming element, and down by the DVC building known as the Copper Creek Villas, the area near their pool has an interesting mining motif. Walking down by the water, you'll find Geyser Point, which is a decent lakeside restaurant, and actually moving to Bay Lake itself, this is also another fantastic spot to relax at this resort. Wilderness Lodge feels pretty isolated from the rest of Disney property, but if you walk the boardwalk through the swamp just past the pool, you'll emerge out onto a dock in Bay Lake, where the resort offers a short 10-minute boat ride to the Magic Kingdom. Out of all the Disney resorts that I have been to, Wilderness Lodge is just the absolute best, which just doesn't result from its great location and amenities, but also through its intense details and thematic depth. Finally though, I want to finish off with Animal Kingdom Lodge, which opened in 2001, and is of course best known for actually providing rooms that allow you to look out and see many African animals. What distinguishes Animal Kingdom Lodge from Wilderness and the Grand Californian is that its scale is smaller, which I think was meant to lead to a more grand reveal of the savannah as you work your way back to the windows of the lobby. That's not to say that the lobby itself isn't impressive, but it's definitely narrower and has less height. Notable elements here include the Zulu tribal spear and shield chandeliers, as well as the bridge that crosses over the lobby on the 3rd floor. Walking through here, you'll observe many architectural features that broadly emulate African art, and even the ceiling is designed to have a thatched roof, which utilizes non-combustible material. On the ground, many display cases can be found with actual African tribal art, and even walking into the halls, you'll find a lot of this as well. The DVC section of this resort, which is known as Kidani Village, is also notable for featuring a ton of art throughout its halls, and even has its own smaller version of a grand lobby. Returning back to the main building though, and heading out the back, you'll find yourself on a small trail that leads out to the center, which is an area enclosed by the wings of the resort, where you can view various animals. Out here, You'll find some rotating signs with information on what animals you might see, and there are often Disney cast members out here as well, who will either talk about the animals or who will host various resort activities. Walking back to the lobby, the backside of the building is actually a much more grand reveal than the front, with its glass flanked by towers of metal leaf. And heading back inside into the restaurant area, this descends 2 floors and becomes a complex, multi-layer series of catwalks and pathways. There is also a water feature that begins here, which trickles down a rock wall and into a basin. Looking down, it appears as if the water is traveling through the rock and into a pool below, which frames the entrance of Boma, probably Disney's best buffet. Heading outside on a path that leads to the main pool area, the water continues as if flowing through the rocks under Chico, again another excellent restaurant, and from here, the water is made to look as if it flows through the pool and out into a rocky enclosure where you can view flamingos. This feature is obviously very similar to Copper Creek at Wilderness Lodge, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn that a lot of people actually miss this, as it's a lot more subtle, which I think was likely the intention. Whereas the Grand Californian and Wilderness Lodge are massive in their scale, Animal Kingdom Lodge was meant to feel more intimate and would provide a sense of discovery and exploration outside of the rooms. It's also worth noting that many of the cast members are from various African countries and will often share their own stories and experiences if you happen to interact with them. While this may be the smallest of the lodges though, this resort is just absolutely packed with detail and interesting art displays, and I think easily joins many other Disney hotels in its artistic and architectural significance. Outside of the films, Disney is of course best known for their parks, but if you're not staying at their resorts, you really are missing out on a lot of interesting themed experiences. One of my favorite things to do in Walt Disney World is to go resort hopping, and while it does require a bit of understanding in how to navigate the various transportation systems, it is a really rewarding activity if you're local or are otherwise staying on property and don't have any park plans. Every resort that Disney offers is interesting in its own way, whether it's trying to spot decade-specific cultural references at Pop Century, or enjoying the Mardi Gras atmosphere and beignets at Port Orleans French Quarter. Not every Disney resort is thematically deep or architecturally significant, but they all offer something unique that make them worth visiting. I'm even a fan of the art of animation, because yes, it is weird that Pop Century only covers the 1950s through the 1990s, and it would be great to have a resort focused on the first half of the century, but this is still a well-themed hotel that incorporates its IP through the lens of Disney animation. It's not like taking the mid-century theme of the contemporary and slapping The Incredibles onto the rooms, but the art of animation feels well designed and thematically satisfying for the films that it celebrates. The very best of Disney is of course the Deluxe resorts though, which includes the Contemporary, the Grand Floridian, the Yacht Club, the Beach Club, the Boardwalk, Wilderness Lodge, and Animal Kingdom Lodge. In my opinion, the only Deluxe resort that doesn't live up to these in its architectural style and theming is the Polynesian, which I think only has a Deluxe designation through its amenities and location on the monorail. Still, Disney from its earliest years and up through Eisner have built some of the most interesting resort experiences that you can find anywhere, and have set a really high standard that is not being met today. Whether it's the cheapening of the experience by slapping characters onto things with no regard for the theme, or designing cheap DVC towers with a Las Vegas aesthetic, it's alarming how much of the resort experience is declining so quickly. Take for example the Riviera Resort, which opened in 2019, it really just kind of ruins the sightlines of Caribbean Beach. That's not to say that contrasting themes can't work, as a castle at the end of Main Street will always be an interesting contrast, but in this case, it's a big corporate tower looming over a laid-back tropical resort. Despite Disney's claim, nothing about the Riviera is actually themed to the French Riviera, other than some vague architectural accents. The lobby is very much fake Las Vegas opulence, but on a tiny scale, and the Disney website emphasizes the resort's unique art collection, which are mostly Disney movie posters in French and Italian. Contemporary Disney also does this weird thing where they have turned Walt into this humble, sanitized figure who is used as a stamp of approval for their often poor decisions, and in this case, the resort has hung up photos of him because he once took a vacation there. Can anyone tell me what this tangled mural has to do with traveling Mediterranean coastlines? What about Peter Pan? What about this random painting of Cinderella Castle? In fairness, the pole slide kind of looks like something you might find there, but that is literally the only element of this resort that fits the supposed theme. It's not that the Riviera is inherently bad, because it would be nice right outside of Disney Springs or somewhere else in Orlando, but this is just such a shocking lack of quality from a company like Disney, which made its name from its attention to detail and thematic depth. Another problematic reinforcement of this trend is the Gran Destino Tower, which also opened in 2019, but was an addition to Coronado Springs, where it also became the new lobby. I'm a bit more forgiving of this because on the surface, its vague Spanish theme doesn't feel out of place with the rest of the resort, but again, it's really just a whole lot of nothing. Like the Riviera, it's very Las Vegas and not at all Disney, and would you be shocked to see Walt and Mickey just randomly placed on a banner in here? The tower is named after Destino, a short surrealist animated film that was conceptualized in 1945 as a collaboration between Salvador Dali and the Disney studio, but it never got far into production and was only finished and released in 2003. Still, the tower has absolutely no aesthetic or thematic connection to the film other than a brief use of floating dandelions, and in the lobby, this is brought together with a painting of a not-so-hidden Mickey. On the 16th floor, there is also the Dahlia Lounge, but that's about it. Taking a long, unthemed hallway with no decoration from the tower, you emerge out into the old lobby building, which is still accessible and is interesting to walk through, where you can at least see some past theming that has remained in place. The exterior over here is also much more visually interesting, and looking over at the tower, it contrasts greatly, standing out as bland and sterile. On the website, Disney describes the front of the tower as striking architectural expression, and I'm not sure about that. Moving forward, other issues with hotels include lobby and room refurbishments that ruin, or at least downgrade what was there before, as I already discussed with Caribbean Beach, but another good example of this is with Saratoga Springs. I can't imagine that this is a resort that anyone really loves, but you can't see the equestrian theme and think that putting cartoon horses in here was anything other than an insane idea, but it did happen in 2021. In 2018, Disney announced a new DVC property, Reflections a Lakeside Lodge, which wasn't built, but would have been an add-on to the Fort Wilderness Campground. Aesthetically, I'm seeing local Orlando suburban apartments, but with Disney IP vomited all over the place, and again, I do not understand why DVC people were excited for this. If you buy into a Disney timeshare, wouldn't you have higher standards for what they're building? Recently, Disney has been constructing the controversial Island Tower at the Polynesian, which required demolishing the building for the Spirit of Aloha dinner show, and erecting again another unthemed Las Vegas-style tower that is a disgusting visual blight on the Seven Seas Lagoon. Also, if you want to get married at the wedding pavilion at the Grand Floridian, now you have a big ugly tower hanging over you. I think my point is pretty clear here, and that Disney wasn't just building great parks, but it was building great hotels and resorts too, many of which reach a high architectural and thematic standard. I can't get over how fantastic the Yacht Club or Wilderness Lodge are, and even when Disney hotels were at the lower level, at least they were visually and thematically interesting in a way that these bland corporate towers are just not. Panchito is a fun, thematically appropriate character for the gift shop at Coronado Springs, but when I see Pegasus at Saratoga, or a photo of the teacups at the boardwalk, it's clear that not only is there no one in charge who cares about your experience, but the lack of care is actively destroying the good things that are already there. Throughout many videos, I have chronicled how Disney destroys its experiences in its parks for a lot of disposable, thematically incorrect mediocrity. In conjunction with this, and with the price increases that consumers have found to be unacceptable for the value that is now provided, the Florida parks have been a ghost town this summer, and it's frustrating because you know that Iger and executive leadership will not recognize that they are the cause of these issues, as they have demonstrated a clear lack of understanding of their parks and resorts. Early Disney, and especially Eisner, set a lot of foundational work that is still propping up the company name, and through this video, I hope that I have provided you with a better appreciation for the resorts that were built in these previous eras. They truly do deserve to be viewed as works of art, and are immensely interesting in how they choose to execute their themes, but as more sterile towers continue to rise, and as more theming is ripped out of resorts in favor of character overlays, it just cheapens the experience, and if you get the chance to leave Disney feedback on this, please let them know why this is a problem. As always, if you made it here to the end, I appreciate you watching, and you can leave a like to help this video reach a wider audience. If you have not yet subscribed and hit the bell notification yet either, you can also do so now to be alerted to new videos as they release.